Hello, and welcome to Lion and Mouse Commentary. We're your hosts, Holland
and Tori,
two best friends as different as a lion and a mouse. Today we are reviewing the movie Klaus, and we will be ranking it on an objective scale of 0 to 10 with only 2 points allotted for personal taste. Feel free to agree, disagree, or just learn about something new. Just be sure to tread lightly, there are spoilers ahead, and cut to the intro. All right, welcome to the Lion's Den. For our new listeners, we'll be breaking down the scoring system as we go, but you can always catch the full breakdown on our website. So let's go ahead and get started. So today I chose this film, Klaus, for us to review, and we decided in light of the holiday season to do some holiday reviews for you. So this was actually familiar to me and blind for Tori. I actually did not, I resisted watching this movie, but it was recommended to me by my brother. So you can thank him for this content because he recommended it to me. So quick synopsis about the film, and then we will jump into our reviews. This is a film that is available on Netflix. Netflix purchased the distribution rights to it, and the Netflix description that shows up when you click the thing is very boring. It's literally one sentence, so I'll read it and then I will read a
better synopsis,
the wiki synopsis.
Okay.
Not Wikipedia, the Netflix wiki synopsis, which is a little better. So the Netflix synopsis is: a selfish postman and a reclusive toy maker form an unlikely friendship, delivering joy to a cold, dark town that desperately needs it.
Boring.
I mean, it's a great one-sentence synopsis, but here's a little more fleshed out one. After being recognized as the Postal Academy's worst student, Jesper is stationed over the North Pole, where there is a shortage of letters due to the hostility between the locals. When he is about to give up, he finds a friend in Alva and discovers Klaus, a carpenter who lives alone in a cabin full of handmade toys. The legacy unfolds as an unlikely friendship forms between the trio. So, that's the general synopsis. This is actually an animated film, and the vocal cast includes Jason Schwartzman, J.K. Simmons, Rashida Jones, Will Sasso, Nita Marguerite Laba, Sergio Pablos, Norm Macdonald, and Joan Cusack. This film was actually nominated for an Oscar. It was nominated for Best Animated Feature. It actually won the British Academy Film Award for Best Animated Feature, and it won multiple Annie Awards, including Best Animated Feature, Best Character Animation in a Feature Film, Best Character Design in a Feature Film, Best Directing in a Feature Film, Best Production Design in a Feature Film, Best Storyboarding in a Feature Film, and Best Editorial in a Feature Film.
Whew.
So,
Sheesh.
Swept Annie Awards. Every award it was nominated for, it won. Klaus is the directorial debut for Sergio Pablos, who wrote the story, and he is the co-creator of Despicable Me, interestingly. Klaus is a Christmas family comedy that tells the story of a desperate postman who inadvertently brings about the genesis of Santa Claus. The screenplay is written by Pablos, Zach Lewis, and Jim Mahoney, based on an original story by Sergio Pablos. The film's co-produced by SPA Studios, Pablos' animation studio, and Atres Media Cine, and executive produced by Jinko Gota, who produced the Lego Movie sequel, The Little Prince, The Illusionist, and Finding Nemo. It was released on November 15th, 2019 by Netflix, who acquired the distribution rights from Sergio Pablos and the respective production companies. So that is kind of the gist of this film. If you don't want any spoilers and want to watch it for yourself, first, go ahead and click off now and go watch it, and then come back and you can hear our opinions on the movie. So let's get in. Tori, if you'll kick us off on the first category.
Okay, so for movies, the first category is plot and story delivery. We have 2 possible points for this. I gave it 1.5. So the first thing I want to talk about is how great I think the setup is of this movie. It's very concise. I feel like that's not common in animated movies. It's more common in live action movies. But for this film, literally, it's like they set up within like 4 minutes and then boom, you're into plot. Instead of like a drawn out 15-20 minute sort of intro. And I thought it was really refreshing to pace an animated movie that way. I can't off the top of my head think of another animated movie that had a setup that was so detailed but concise like that. It wasn't like we jumped into the plot when I had no idea what was going on. It's just they used the time so efficiently at the very beginning of the movie that by the time the plot was rolling, I felt like I had a pretty good grasp of the situation. I think that overall the plot is very simple and easy to follow, but I don't think that's a bad thing. It's simply delivered in a way that feels very accessible, I guess, as a watcher. I do think that one negative is that when Jesper finally gets to the town, whose name escapes me, that setup of the location is a little messy and feels weirdly rushed. Like they're trying to rush him into a routine almost. Not the characters, but just like the way that the story is written. And so it almost feels a little disorienting, and not in a way like it's disorienting because this place is a madhouse, but like it's disorienting because I don't understand like how things are progressing right now. So that was one negative that I had with the story delivery, but I didn't think it was a super big deal, because as we see the town conflict, we see a lot of the town conflict from the children's eyes, and I found that to be a really interesting, fresh take. Most of the time when your protagonist is an adult, you get the perspective of the conflict from their eyes. And it makes sense. And we do get Jesper's perspective through a lot of the film, but most of the conflict is discovered through the children of the town. And I just thought that was kind of a cool way to like deliver it, is to have them tell us what the problem is. We get the idea that there is a conflict from the adults in the town, but there's no detail. And so now that we get to see how that conflict affects the children, the conflict it feels more pressing at that time when you kind of realize that, like, you know, these kids aren't even allowed to play with each other because of tradition. Like, that's literally the only problem here. And so seeing how it kind of affects them and leaves them feeling confused and almost like wanting to expand in their friend circles, it kind of makes the conflict feel like more of a deal than the adults make it. And it helps us to kind of see the ridiculousness of the conflict in a way that, like, I think there's some things that as adults we do make into deals that don't need to be. And when you see something through the simplistic eyes of a child again, it kind of puts things back into perspective. And I think in a weird way, the delivery of the story of this movie gives us that opportunity to kind of see, like, why the fight, why the conflict, when there's really no reason for it. And even if there was a reason, I think the kind of the innocence of a child would dictate that you would resolve that conflict and find forgiveness and move on. And so just seeing that kind of stark contrast between the two groupings of characters and how that moves the story forward, I found very creative. Also, they deal with some heavy topics in this movie that I feel would typically be really hard ones to navigate in like a family movie, but they do it really well. The biggest example of this is they deal with the tragedy of infertility with Klaus and his wife. Mm-hmm. And that's something I think would be very difficult to explain and navigate to children in any sort of media, but they do it in a way that's respectful and still you feel the heaviness of the grief that surrounds it, but they don't give you any terrible details that would, burden a child that may be watching this movie. But as an adult, you look at it and you're like, wow, you understand the burden that these characters have gone through. And so seeing that in what is a lighthearted Christmas movie felt surprising, but not in a bad way. I was more so like, wow, they're like including some really difficult topics in here, but it doesn't feel difficult. It's just it seemed so naturally woven into the story as part of the burden of the characters that we meet, that I bought it all. And so I really, really appreciated just the way that they handled that situation. And really, I think the movie is very heartfelt, which is what you want in a Christmas movie. I think, obviously, when you think of like a Christmas movie or a holiday movie or just the holidays in general, there is a certain sort of feeling that you associate with the holiday season. Nostalgia is obviously a big one, but also things like wonder and magic. You want a little bit of like awe in the media that you consume around this time. Something that feels very almost soft, like you want things to feel kind of soft and comforting and cozy around this time. And I think that this movie gives us all of those things without feeling like just the same old Christmas movie that we've been watching, especially kids' Christmas movies. I think a lot of kids' Christmas movies are just kind of like copy and paste of each other, but I didn't think that of this one. I felt like it hit all of the Christmas notes that you want to have, but everything else, all the space around those things, they played around with a lot, and I feel like it gave us a really cool product. So because of that, I gave it 1.5 points out of 2.
All right. I also gave this 1.5 points out of 2. I agree. I really like the setup of the story, how it's done really quickly. I really like, in kind of telling the story, they set up kind of who Jesper is pretty early on, his relationship with his dad, kind of he's supposed to be, a postman, and then the stark contrast between kind of who he is and what he's used to, and now he's living in basically the North Pole with these warring clans, and it's just a nightmare. It's a pretty typical plot of like, you need to learn your lesson. We're going to send you off to this place where nobody has had success and demand that you find success, or you're cut off from your affluent lifestyle. It's a pretty typical, common story. However, it's done really well in combining it with a Christmas origin story. I agree as well. This film does cover some pretty heavy topics like infertility, grief. Klaus has lost his wife and is still grieving that. And even in the sense that Jesper is kind of trying to find his place and is discouraged at the fact that he may, lose everything that he has and be stuck in this, what he sees at the time as this horrible town. The concept that Alma is saving up for something better, and her dream has kind of died of being a teacher, and she's trying to just get out of there. All of those kind of concepts are, and stories and motives are all going on at the same time, and yet it never once feels jumbled or chaotic or like you can't follow who is who and what they want. It's all told very well. Just the way that it's structured and paced and all of that's introduced is just very clear, and yet it's still really fun and entertaining. And as you're watching this, I think that it's very difficult to create a Santa Claus origin story that hasn't already been done. I feel like the origin of Santa Claus has been explored and exhausted, and that was one hesitation I had in watching this film at all is I don't want to watch another movie about Santa Claus. Like, I can already predict exactly what's going to happen. I've already got the whole movie in my head before I've even watched it. And that wasn't the case with this movie. One thing I really like is that, like you said, kind of the children are the focus of the film, and you're watching how this warring clans, this kind of cartoonish, over-the-top fight between these clans unfolds, and you see how it's impacted these kids. You know, they're not going to school. They don't know how to read and write. These kind of basic things. And then in that same way, all of the Santa Claus myths and stories about him and how he is, who he is, and how you get the toys and all of that unfolds with kind of this children's rumor mill. And I really like how it's so true to that. It's like what makes sense to a kid is really where the Santa Claus story comes from. It's not that Jesper, he kind of initiates and gets the ball rolling, of course, but really all of the myths about Klaus, you see the scene where all these kids are talking about Klaus. Oh, it's Klaus. Oh, and if you leave your sock hanging on the fireplace, then he puts the toy in the sock. And you see, as the viewer, why that happened was because Jesper's actually the one delivering the toys and he doesn't want to get attacked by a guard dog or something. But how that morphs into a legend by the children who are impacted by this. It's not that Santa and his elves and Jesper have made all these legends for you. It's just these events are unfolding, and then the Santa Claus legend comes from these
word
kids.
Of mouth, yeah.
And I really thought that was so inventive and creative. And then it progresses throughout the rest of the story, that kind of theme as these children kind of creating their own path and creating the outcome of the story just continues throughout the rest of the film. And then, of course, just the way in this plot that as the children change, the town changes. So these children have maybe this motivation of getting a toy and, getting a present, but as they change, their parents change. And as they change amongst playing with each other and doing nice things for other adults in their town, then the adults in turn are beginning to change their behavior. And then things just morph and progress with kind of this overarching theme of the film, which is kind of the quote that a true selfless act always sparks another, or a true act of goodwill always sparks another. And that's kind of the theme. And then you watch that theme progress throughout the film. And it starts with just getting a toy, but then it progresses into really changing the entire town. And then I like how it even kind of ties the bow on the end, where as the kids' rumor mill is kind of spreading, at the end, when Klaus and Alva find out that this angry mob is coming and they're going to get rid of all these presents, they find that out because the kids are the ones talking, Mm-hmm. So it's still, everything is kind of word of mouth through these kids, and that kind of moves the story forward. And I think that's really unique to just stories and film in general, but it's pretty accurate. If you've ever worked with kids, you know that they'll pretty much tell you anything. I like that you're watching this town change and you're also watching Jesper change as well. I like that him making a toy for the Sami girl and getting her to the teacher so they can write their letter to Klaus, how that really is his first selfless act. And then you watch his relationship with Klaus kind of evolve and change. So it's not just about the origin of Santa Claus and the changing in this town. And it's not even just about Jesper changing and growing as a character. It's also about his relationship amongst all of those things. So it's his relationship with Klaus, his relationship with Alva, his relationship with the town, the way that his relationship with the Sami girl, as that kind of progresses. So it's kind of how, it's almost like Jesper is kind of the linchpin, but all of these things are being affected and they're all kind of interwoven together. The reason I didn't give it full points was I do think it is a little derivative. Not necessarily derivative intentionally, but the plot is kind of been done before. Just the general kind of concept, particularly with Jesper's arc, it kind of gives off a lot of the Emperor's New Groove vibes. I think even the voice actors...
Spoiled kid learns his lesson kind of thing.
Right. Rich, spoiled kid goes, is humbled and then learns his lesson and then finds out that he likes the humbling setting even better than his life of affluence before. That's just kind of, it's been done before. And I think it's kind of to the detriment of the film that the voice actor that plays Jesper sounds a lot like Cusco, even in kind of his delivery of the lines. And then you also have this skinny looking character with this big burly looking character. It kind of gives off the Cusco and Pacha vibes from the Emperor's New Groove. Again, I don't think it's intentional. And there's a reason that themes and archetypes continue in storytelling because they're
effective.
Yeah, they're effective and relatable and understandable. But then also you still even have kind of, Romeo and Juliet, Hatfields and McCoys, this kind of warring clans is not a new concept. It's kind of been done before. Although I do think this film does a unique turn on it, especially in the context of A Christmas Story. And then again, the one other thing, I didn't quite give it full points because there is kind of this third act breakup where they find out that Jesper had this quota to meet, and if he met it, he could go back to his comfortable lifestyle, and he's found out, which, of course, we saw that coming. We knew that was going to happen. It's kind of predictable. However, I do want to commend this film on the fact that even in that moment where we kind of could see it coming from the beginning of the movie that Jesper's going to get found out, that his friends, Klaus and Alva particularly, he doesn't have any... The story resists the common requirement that he has to have some kind of penance to prove that he was really sincere all along. That when he comes back, they pretty much immediately forgive him. All is forgiven. They move on. The presents weren't real when he's, trying to save the presents and everything. He doesn't have to do that to prove that he was really genuine all along, or that maybe he started selfish, but he's changed. He didn't have to do anything to prove that happening. They had the decoy presence and had it all handled without him. He didn't come back and save the day to prove that he really isn't a bad guy. And so I like that aspect of it, that they may have a third act breakup, but they don't then make your hero do some kind of penance or re-earn their friendship. When he finds out the presents were fake, they're still his friends. And they still are like, yeah, well, we're still friends. We're going to just move on. And so I like that that's kind of a more mature approach to that aspect of it. So that could technically, I guess, fall into characters, but I think as a plot device, I really appreciated that. So in general, 1.5 points out of 2 for me.
Okay. So our second category is characters, where we give a total of 3 points, and I gave it 2 points. I think that Jesper is very much, like you said, the archetype of spoiled brat, kind of a likable brat, but still spoiled brat, and then he gets his butt handed to him, and then he falls in love with the humility of his new situation. Yes, that's kind of, we've seen that a lot. So, do I dislike Jesper? No. But do I feel like I've seen him before? Yes. It kind of just felt like, okay, I know who this character is. I know how this character is going to function. I know the decisions he's going to make and how he's going to make them. So he was a little bit easy for me to read. So it just didn't give him a lot of room for any sort of unpredictability or anything in that regard. Not necessarily a bad character, just predictable. I was super excited to hear Joan Cusack when I heard her voice. I think she is a fantastic actress, and I think she just brings so much exuberance to everything she does. And so when I heard her start talking, I was like, oh! That's Joe Cusack. So I got very excited. She just does a fantastic job. I just want to shout her out because I just like her a lot. I think that the humor is pretty good, but I wouldn't call this a comedy of a film. I would say most of the humor comes from Jesper. And then there's not a ton of humor outside of that, with the exception of some slapstick moments that happen. And it was just a smidge disappointing for me. I like it when we get humor moments from a bunch of different characters instead of assigning humor to certain characters. And I felt like this was a film that was more of like we're going to assign humor to a few people, and then the other people are going to be the straight men all the time. That was something that was just like a smidge disappointing to me. Was just kind of, I guess, the allocation of funny moments. I do think the character design is absolutely fantastic. I do like the contrast of all the characters. I feel like every character looks very distinct. They have a very distinct face for everybody. Clothing styles, hairstyles, that sort of thing. So they really design every character in a way that's very memorable. However, on the flip side of that, I realized about halfway through the movie, I was having a really hard time remembering everybody's names. For some reason, I don't know if it's that they just don't repeat the names often enough for me to remember a lot of them, but I found myself recognizing a character, but for the life of me could not remember some of their names. So most of the children, I had no idea what their names are.
I think most of them actually just remain unnamed.
Do they?
Yeah.
Then maybe that's why. But I felt like there were some characters that were named and I just couldn't remember their names very well. Voice acting in general is very good across the board. And I like the dynamic that we have between Jesper and Klaus. However, I feel like there are a few moments where the annoyingness of Jesper is pushed a little too far. And I almost wish that they had, in those moments, given Klaus more room to give something back in the scene. And I know that they probably did that intentionally, that he is supposed to be a very stoic and quiet man. And he opens up more throughout the course of the movie. So I understand for plot delivery, it probably had to be that way. But because of that, I felt like we knew a whole lot about Jesper, and even by the end of the movie, just a smidge about Klaus. We didn't have a ton of opportunity to give Klaus moments to shine against people. He was always just kind of there physically, but I feel like his presence, while physically large, was often overshadowed by other characters simply because even though he was quiet and stoic, it's almost like they gave him no energy through a lot of the scenes. And so those were kind of my critiques on the characters. Those are pretty much all my notes. I think the highlight in the characters is their design and voice acting. But I do think there are a few archetypes that I'm just a smidge bored of at this point. I'm going to say smidge a bunch more in this episode. I've noticed I said this like 8 times. But I'm just a little bit bored of the archetypes because they are archetypes we see a whole lot. And they didn't break out of those archetypes a lot. There were a few small moments that I feel like we get that. But for the most part, I feel like the design and the voice acting is really the highlight of the characters. So that's why I gave it only 2 points out of 3.
All right. I also gave it 2 points out of 3. I think I agree with a lot of your points. I think that in general, Jesper just gives off those kind of Cusco vibes. He's a spoiled brat and he needs to, learn his lesson. And so I think in doing so, though, it does give the audience a lot of reason to kind of laugh at his misfortune because we know he's not the best guy and he's learning his lesson. And I think that the fact that he is kind of the punching bag of his own misfortune kind of gives us a lot of reason to enjoy when things don't go his way and to enjoy when he's being, chased by things or slighted in some way. But I do think that his arc is very believable. It's very gradual, and it's shown in a very gradual way. And I appreciate that they didn't just have him be this horrible, horrible person, and we've made him so unlikable at the beginning that when he's changed, it's not believable that he's changed without it being a quote-unquote oops, I've changed moment, where it's like he had one thing happen and now all of a sudden he's a saint. So I do appreciate that, even though he is kind of a stereotypical character, that his development and his growth is very gradual in a way that we can buy it as an audience. I do also agree with kind of what you said about Klaus. He is really quiet and stoic, but I do think they do really good at doing a lot of storytelling with him with very little dialogue. I think that the physical humor of him being this massive man and Jesper's this tiny little guy, and he thinks that, this massive woodsman is probably just gonna murder him, is just, I think that provides a lot of comedy. The one scene I can think of is when he is at his own Klaus is at his own house, and he's about to throw a birdhouse up in the tree, and Jesper thinks that he's given him a noose to kind of hang himself with, which is kind of is a really dark sounding joke. And Jesper takes the noose and he puts it over his own head. I mean, that's pretty comical moment, even with almost little dialogue. It's just very physical. And so I think they do a pretty good job of using Klaus and telling a lot of story with him physically. And then I think his backstory is just excellent. I think they did a great job of giving him a lot of heart without a lot of words. And then the storytelling of his backstory, and then the way that he sees Jesper and kind of that white magic wind kind of appears behind him, which at that point we don't really know what that is, but then later they very closely tie that to his wife. I think that that's just done very tastefully. And so it's kind of this very realistic, as an adult, it's a very realistic moment where you kind of realize it's almost like a visual representation of an adult who's lost a loved one kind of thinks to themselves like, well, a part of me that died when my loved one died is kind of stirring again. And I think that's a very, very mature theme and concept, and you can either get it, or take it that way or not. I think it's open to interpretation, but it's something that a kid's not necessarily going to pick up on, but an adult, it just has a lot more impact for that specific character development. And I think putting that kind of very mature concept of him as, the fact that he and his wife couldn't have children and then his wife has died, those are very, very adult concepts that very many adults can relate to, and even some kids can relate to. And I think building that into his character gives him even more prominence and presence, even though he is a man of few words. I really like Alva as a character. I think Rashida Jones does a great job with voice acting for her, but I really appreciate the concept of her and her development as a character. She starts as this very cynical, very beaten down, worn down individual who's selling fish out of her school because she's just trying to make enough money to get by. And then you watch her change and grow, and you kind of watch that spark of being a teacher, which is what, the kinds of people that go into education as a profession that genuinely love the profession, it's a piece of them that doesn't die, And so just you watch her take out of her own savings, and you watch the change in the school and the change in the kids, and as she is kind of has that desire in her kind of awakened, and I just love that story with her, and you really watch her change and grow as a character in addition to the rest of the town and kind of our main protagonist Jesper. As you watch him change, you're also watching her change as well. The design of the characters, I agree, are just excellent. The way that they're all very distinct and very unique. However, I couldn't really give this full points because I do think the clans and the clan leaders are almost overly cartoony
Yeah.
in their portrayal. It's an animated film. It's very stylized, and I think that that's fine. There's great films and great stories with very stylized art styles and characters, but I do think that the clan leaders and kind of those prominent clansmen that are the antagonists of the film are just really cartoony, and their motivation is just frankly just stupid. It's we have to do this. We hate each other because of tradition, and you don't want to go against all those years of tradition, do you? This is your heritage. Like, I understand the point that, like, well, that's kind of realistic. We do have, prejudices and negative connotations towards other people, and fights and myths against one another for pretty stupid reasons. And sure, that's valid, but for a storytelling device, it is kind of ridiculous. I wish they had a little more of a grounded reasoning behind that, but I also do think if there was a more grounded reasoning, then it would probably detract from the story that we do have. Also, I find their two kids, the two clan leaders' children, that I don't know their names, but they hardly have any dialogue between them, and it kind of ends up with this Romeo and Juliet story between them. Those two characters I just find very annoying. I get that it's a family movie, it's a kids movie, maybe kids and families, it's kind of what you have in those films, but I just think it's kind of stupid and unnecessary. But otherwise, I think the main cast is done really well. And then the kind of final note I have with the characters, Jesper's dad is the real MVP. I love the fact that he comes to see Jesper, and just this one shot of him sitting on the boat and the look he gives Jesper to have him basically say, like, you better tell me what's really going on here, because this doesn't make any sense. That moment is just so good, and I love the fact that they don't make Jesper's dad a villain. He's not a villainous character. He's sent him on this whole mission because he's trying to teach his son a lesson and make his son into a good man. And then at the end of it, he says that he's proud of him, and he's proud of the changes that he's seen in Jesper, and he doesn't in any way try and convince him to come back to his life of affluence. He essentially, we don't see that conversation, but his dad is just a good dad. And it's like, if you're happy here and you want to be here, then be here, So I think that that's a great moment. I think it's great to make the dad of your protagonist a positive character instead of this stereotypical villain, and I think that was a great decision for storytelling. And then also, he's just a great character. I think he's very underrated. So 2 out of 3 points for me.
Cool. Okay, so our third category is aesthetics. We have 2 possible points for movies. I gave it a full 2 points. I think this is really where this movie shines, is in its aesthetics. So the first thing I noticed was how distinct the art style was. And it took me like 30-40 minutes to realize what it reminded me of. It reminds me of that Disney short Paperman. You know the one I'm talking about? Yep. Where like he throws the paper airplanes down because he's trying to get the attention of the girl or whatever. Yep. It reminds me of that in its style. Excuse me. It's not black and white like most of Paperman is, with the exception of like the red lips. But the way that it feels textured, almost like you could touch it and feel it. Which is a very strange thing to say and try to describe a film, an animated film, but it genuinely feels, while you're watching it, like you could literally reach out and touch it and like feel all of the textures that are so beautifully animated into this movie. So the style is very, very cool. I really, really enjoy that. I think that they use a lot of different light temperatures in a really cool and nice way. The like indoor lighting is very warm and cozy and homey and orange. And then everything outside in the snow is very blue and stark and cold feeling. But then they also sometimes give you pockets of warmth in the outside scenes and pockets of cold in the indoor scenes. And it has a lot to do with emotion and feeling at the time. So that's all really interesting how they use that. It's almost feels like a very theater-esque way to light your animated movie or even film. Like, it just feels like they're using a lot of practical, like, live action effects in the animated movie, which is interesting and cool, I think. It's like they're kind of blurring that line between animation and real life. They also have a lot of really good sound design in this movie. There's a lot of really cool echo effects. They mute some sounds that you would not expect to be muted, and it's because of the snow. And you think like how in real life sound is muted from snow, and they translate that into parts of the movie. And I thought that was very interesting and realistic. There's a scene where the chalk screeches on the chalkboard and I actually cringed while I was watching it. Like, you know, you always hear the expression like nails on a chalkboard, and nobody enjoys that sound, but actually hearing it and having like a physical reaction to that, I think is a really effective use of sound effects. These are the sort of things that you want from your Foley artists, is like guttural responses from your audience. So to have that happen, I thought was really effective. They also, I am a sucker for snow effects, and they just nail all of the weather effects. Like even when the snow's not coming down, but like other weather effects, they nail it. They get the glare on the sun on the snow, the glare from the sun on the snow really well. Dark, like outdoor scenes are always sort of shadowy in all the right ways, while still giving the realistic expectation that there's a moon outside. But the snow is great. Genuinely, I feel like the snow might be as good or maybe better than like the snow effects in Frozen. Don't come at me, Frozen stans. But they just do a really good job at the weather effects with the aesthetics. The last note that I have for aesthetics is a weird one that I don't know if I'm going to explain properly. So if this sounds really weird, just accept it. This movie feels, in the best way, like a video game. Like, you know how indie video games nowadays, they're kind of expounding on the stylized, theatrical, dramatic cutscene thing. Like, that's just really popular in video games right now, particularly things like RPGs or visual novels. It gave me sort of an Aviary Attorney vibe. Yeah. Again, similar art styles. I understand that Aviary Attorney is all in sepia tones, but like sort of this very stylized, plays out like a cutscene in a video game, but that goes on for an hour and 25 minutes or whatever. So in the best way, this movie felt like a video game to me. I was just like at any time expecting it to like resolve a scene, and then I have a controller in my hand and I have to do something. Not to say that I was disappointed that it never resolved into a video game, because I understood that this was a movie, but it felt like that. It kind of felt almost like the experience aesthetically was very three-dimensional and like touchable. I know this sounds like I'm lost my mind. It's because I don't know exactly how to explain it, but that's just what I kept thinking when I was watching is that this feels like a game in a good way. So because of that, I gave aesthetics full 2 out of 2 points.
Awesome. I also gave this 2 out of 2 points for aesthetics as well. I agree. I think that really the artistic style of this movie is really where it shines. The animation style, I love that it's kind of a throwback to traditional animation style, the same way that like Paperman was a throwback to traditional animation style. I think that more and more as 3D CG animated films are so prominent and widespread that there's kind of this yearning amongst animated film viewers for that traditional style, a return of that traditional style, kind of a back to your roots, if you will. I do think that there's a really good use of kind of lighting and fog, particularly when Jesper arrives on the ferry and he gets to the town of Smearensburg and everything looks hazy and foggy, and various pieces of the landscape kind of are coming through the fog as you're moving through the town and things like that. It feels palpable. It adds to kind of the mood, and of course it's cold and realistic for a frigid tundra, but it just really helps kind of build into the mood of this kind of creepy looking, almost Tim Burton-esque style of a town. The color palette of the town also changes kind of as the spirit of the town, if you will, changes. So there's a lot of pale grays, cold colors, and then the town visibly gets warmer as the people in a way get warmer. So particularly it kind of culminates to when Jesper sees Alma at the school towards the end, and they've decorated it for Christmas and people are singing Christmas carols. It's just very warm. All of those tones are very warm. The lights are warm. It's bright. It feels like you just stepped out into a town square, but you wouldn't, if you were present in that town square, it's almost like you wouldn't even feel cold. You would feel warmth. It's just very, very beautiful. Just the way that they've changed the town. Another example, Alma's schoolhouse when she's cutting open the fish, it's just very dank and cold, a lot of greens and browns and grays, dark tones. And then, of course, the school, when there are students there learning, it's very bright, warms, blues, reds, oranges, very warm colors. I think there's a lot of shots that are really cinematic looking, particularly when the very first toy is delivered to that first child and you're watching Klaus's reaction to the kid opening the toy and then playing with it. Yeah. And then another one that feels really cinematic is when Jesper brings the Sami girl to Alva to write her letter, and they're sitting there talking to her, and the camera pans kind of around the table, kind of moves circularly around the table. It feels like it's one of those benefits of modern animation where you can literally put a camera in place and move it around your set. It feels very cinematic, and it's just done very tastefully where it doesn't feel jarring like we've moved from a 2D to a 3D animation style. It still fits within that world and feels like that 2D animation aesthetic. I love the use of wind as magic, that kind of magic element that kind of reoccurs with Klaus. And the way that the score and the songs are included, and in general with the sound design, kind of like you mentioned, those songs, those lyrical songs that are included in the film, I think are done at a really appropriate moment. Like one is singing about, not messing with the postman, like that kind of for comical benefit. But then the song that's used when Jesper is making the toy for the Sami girl, the kind of the sled, and into that scene when they give it to her, that song that's used, I think it's just done very well. I think that it's so easy for animated films to use songs with lyrics that are played over the film as kind of to convey a message or move the plot forward, and kind of that ambient soundtrack, if you will. It so easily can feel like it just pulled you right out of the film, but I think that it's done very well in this movie without it feeling like you're now watching a Disney musical. I think that's done very well. And it's a feel-good moments of the movie. And then the other thing I just wanted to touch on with aesthetics, I love the animal designs in this film. I love the kind of that cartoonish look of like the guard dogs in the film, that really Tim Burton-y looking of the fish in the fish shop, and then contrast that with the way that the reindeer look. It's very regal looking, and their antlers are very prominent and large. And I think it's just the design of the animals are really well. It still fits the world, and yet it feels aesthetically appropriate to what kind of animal this is. So like the guard dogs have really large eyes and really big teeth, and they look very comical. And yet then the horse that's pulling Jesper's carriage looks kind of like a pack animal, like a carriage horse, and yet he still fits the world of this kind of wintry, snowy environment. And then you have the reindeer that look extremely like regal and, proficient, almost like this elite looking animal, which feels appropriate to be the kind of animal that would pull Santa Claus's sleigh. So that was just another thing I really enjoyed in the film. So 2 out of 2 aesthetics for me.
Cool. Next category is personal taste and preference. We have 2 possible points. I gave it 1. So this movie is very wholesome, very cute. I really enjoyed it. I liked a lot about it. I like the whole feel. I like Christmas movies in general. I like Christmas in general. So I really enjoyed it, but the caveat here is that I don't really feel like I would want to watch it again, at least not recently. Like, most of the time when I feel like I could just consume something over and over and over is where I would like rank it higher. This is something that I feel satisfied with one watch for now. Maybe I'll watch it again next year, but I don't think I would watch it again this Christmas season. So because of that, I didn't feel like a yearning to consume it again. So that's why I just gave it 1 point out of 2.
All right. I actually gave it 2 out of 2 points for me. I really, really enjoyed this film. And I think one reason I enjoyed it so much was just because it's visually so beautiful. But I also just found it such a refreshing Christmas movie. I am not a fan of the typical Hallmark movies for Christmas time. I don't watch them. I don't even have the Hallmark channel, but if I did, I would not watch Hallmark movies for Christmas. I think this movie kind of came at a good time for me personally, just in general, because I'm so worn out of the typical Christmas movie format, the kind of Santa Claus origin story. Don't get me wrong, these are all classics and I do watch them at Christmas time, but movies like The Santa Claus and Elf and, I don't particularly care for Home Alone. I know that's a big popular Christmas movie, but particularly the ones that, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Frosty the Snowman, all of those movies that kind of tackle the what's the origin behind these Christmas legends like Santa Claus are just so overdone for me. I'm sick of them. I'm just so tired of them. I've seen them so many times. I don't even really enjoy them anymore. And this movie for me was just such a refreshing take on a Christmas story. And it's still about Santa Claus, which I'm not a big, I don't go crazy for Santa Claus merchandise or home decor at Christmas, but it was fun and refreshing for me, and it just was a good story. The Emperor's New Groove is a Disney movie I really enjoy, so maybe that's another bias that I have, is that it just has a good story. You get to watch these characters kind of grow and develop and change, and the relationships between them are just really enjoyable and believable. And then it's just so aesthetically pleasing to watch as well. I think that for me, I would personally add this to my kind of holiday routine. Maybe in 5 or 10 years I'd get sick of it and it would drop down the list. But for this point in time in my life, I think that it's definitely one of my top Christmas movies that I would add to my yearly watch list.
Okay. And then the last category we have is creativity. So for 1 possible point, I gave it that full point. I do think that this movie takes the overdone origin of Santa thing and really does make that fresh, like you mentioned. I think that it's creative. I think it's it gives a new perspective to what we have, kind of grown up watching. It puts kind of the origin into like a new setting, a new world. When you think North Pole, you think like an expanse of snow with like a candy cane gingerbread workshop with little elves walking around. And so like it's refreshing to have something different kind of given to us as the origin of Santa. So I think that it could end up being kind of a new iconic Christmas movie. I think it has the potential to do that, especially with this is what, the third holiday season it's been on Netflix now. So
yeah,
or fourth, 19, no. 20, 21, 22.
Yeah.
So this is the fourth holiday season that it's been on Netflix. So I think it has the potential to kind of become another staple for the current generation of kids. Maybe that'll be a Christmas movie they grew up watching, and in 15 years they'll be like, oh my gosh, it's my favorite since I was a kid. So I think it has all of those facets, and it has the potential to be that. So because of that, I definitely wanted to give it the full point. I think it's a very specific new look at the Christmas story, and it delivered something in just like a new packaging. I think it's nice to kind of get something that feels somewhat familiar, but is given to you in all new packaging, so you digest it differently. And I think that's what we got here. And so because of that, 1 full point for creativity.
All right. For creativity, I gave this half a point out of a full point. I think that it is a unique origin story of Santa Claus. It doesn't feel like a tropey Christmas movie. And it doesn't try and over-explain things. It doesn't try and touch every single possible concept that somebody could have of Santa Claus and give you an explanation for every single one. I like that it takes what it wants to be, and it does that, and it does it really well. I think it's really unique that it's explaining the origin of letter writing to Santa, which has not been done to my knowledge in Christmas films. Like, why do we write letters to Santa? Well, this is a good origin story of why and where that came about. And I think that I like the aspect of there is this kind of magic aspect of it, and the fact that Klaus in the end of the film is no more. He's just gone, and we're not there's no explanation really behind that, and there's really no explanation of when Jesper says at the very, very end that once a year he gets to see his friend again. I think that I like that this film lets the viewer fill in the spaces on their own. It doesn't over-explain things to you. It doesn't tell you, well, what does that actually mean? Or where did he go? Or what about during the rest of the year? Is Santa's elves making toys? And it doesn't even touch any of that. It leaves all of that alone, and it just lets you fill in the gaps on your own. Whatever you think that is, you can just figure that out on your own. And I think that's so uncommon in movies today, especially in kids' movies. They feel like they have to give you every answer to every question before you even ask it, and this movie just lets you interpret that on your own. I didn't give it a full point for creativity because, again, I do think the story itself is a little repetitive, as in the sense that it's been done before. So for the film as a whole, I think it definitely deserves credit for the creative aspects that it does well. I just think in general, the story and the plot itself, meaning the kind of concept of Jesper needing to learn his lesson, etc., I think that's a little overdone. So half a point for creativity for me out of 1 possible point.
Okay.
So what was your total score?
My total is 7.5 out of 10.
All right. And my total score is 8 out of 10. So I think it's pretty comparable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. Any final thoughts before we move into lightning round? Okie dokie. So, lightning round questions. Favorite character?
I think I would have to... You convinced me in your talk. I'm going to say Jesper's dad. He's really good. He's a great character. I wish we see more of him.
Yeah. I would agree. I think Jesper's dad is my favorite character. Although if we had to pick like main character, Alva, I really like her as a character.
Too, probably.
She's a great character. Least favorite character.
Can I just like group all of the like clan leaders together into one answer?
Well, there's technically 2 clan leaders.
Okay, but the leaders of the clans were fine, but all of the like boardsmen or whatever.
Oh, okay.
You know, I hated them all.
All right.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I don't know any of their names, but like all of the other like family members that like sat at the table and judged people, not a fan.
Yeah. I think my least favorite character is the girl that's the daughter of like the Ellingbow clan leader. And she just says mine all the time.
Yeah.
That's probably my least favorite character.
Very annoying.
She's just extremely annoying. And dumb. Just
Mm-hmm.
dumb. Most surprising moment or your favorite moment? You can kind of go either way with that one.
I really liked the scene where they had brought the like, I don't know, the like air sled thing to the Sami girl.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like watching from behind the snowdrift and they just like see her like playing with her family. And it was just like such a sweet moment. And I thought it was like very poignant and pretty. So I think I would say that moment was my favorite.
Yeah. I think the moment I thought was pretty surprising, which I feel like there was another one, but I can't remember it off the top of my head right now when I wrote these questions. So I'm going to just go with the one that's coming to mind right now. But one moment I thought was really surprising to me and I really liked it was the scene, and it's so brief, but the part when Alva takes the money out of her savings and she has this moment where she's debating whether or not to do it. And she takes the money. She has just seen how these kids respond to learning how to write their own names. And then she has this moment where she's debating, like, do I take the money out of my savings to like buy supplies for these kids? And that moment I was like, oh my gosh, she's taking her own money. No way. And, you know, shout out to, you know, the teachers we may have listening, but I know there's a lot of teachers that do that themselves, that take money out of their own pockets to further their students' education. So, but I was really surprised. That was a moment I definitely did not expect in this movie. Next question. Favorite artistic choice. So this could be a scene or a character design or a setting or, you know, an animation moment, something like that. So artistically, you know, did you have a favorite moment?
I think I would say, like seeing the style of all of the toys that Klaus had made. And it was like, you could tell that it was like his style, but like he'd tried a bunch of different things. But artistically, like everything was so beautiful. And like, I know I had talked about the textures before, but like, it's like you can really see like every grain of wood and like all of the, like, even like the shine of like the metal and stuff that was used in it. So just that whole scene where it kind of like showcases all of the toys that he'd made was just like a really pretty artistic moment. And I think it showed a lot of heart and story while really just being like aesthetically, it's more of an aesthetic moment, but it also furthered the plot.
Yeah. I think, I'm not sure if I would say, I mean, I kind of want to go back to what I kind of already mentioned was the animal design, like the creature design in the film. But I think specifically scratch all that. I think what I would say my favorite artistic choice is the way that they designed Alma's schoolhouse when she's selling fish, and that whole encounter that Jesper has with her when he first meets her. I just love the way color-wise, the design of all the different fish, but the color they choose to go with. They choose this kind of like dark, sickly looking green lighting, and the tones are just very like, what's the term? It's very tonal. Like it's like the color palette is whatever color mixed with a little bit of black. So it's just this really dark looking environment. It kind of looks like an evil scientist lab or something like that if you were watching a different film. So I really liked the color palette used there, and I don't think they used that same kind of color palette anywhere else, but I really enjoyed that artistic decision in making that whole environment just feel so, like, it's almost like you can feel the dampness of that environment. I just think that was really, really cool.
For sure.
All right. Would you make any changes to the movie or the story if you were directing this film?
I think I would just try to replace some of the, like, tropes that we see too much with something different. Even if it's, like, just changing the dynamic of Jesper and, like, where he, like, his whole personality and or design to something a little less expected, I guess. Or have him make choices that you wouldn't have expected from a character like that earlier in the movie. Just make him a little more unpredictable. But yeah, I think most of the changes that I would make would just boil down to the tropes that we just see too much of.
Yeah. I think it would have changed the motivation behind the clan leaders. Like, why there's this eternal feud. I probably would have come up with something a little more, even if it wasn't something you were ever going to fix in the story or ever even really address it. I think it would have just changed it to something other than we hate each other because of tradition, and you're not going to suddenly make friends with the other clan because you wouldn't want to go back on our tradition. To me, that just seems so flat and unbelievable to the point that it just doesn't even make sense why they would be so concerned to get Jesper out of town if it's literally only because of tradition. I mean, if there was just something else they could have come up with to just make it a little less nonsensical.
Yeah.
Okay, if you had to pick a clan to be a part of, the clans are either the Crumb clan, which is Joan Cusack's character's clan, or the Ellingbow clan. Which clan would you be a part of?
Do I have
yes,
to?
Yes, you have to pick.
I guess I would pick the Crumb just because I like Joan Cusack.
Yeah, I'd probably pick that one too. We could be in the same clan.
Okay, that would make it more bearable, I guess.
We'll just pick the same clan.
Okay.
All right, if you had to live and work in this town, you have to pick a job to have. What job would you pick? I'm
picking the library because ain't nobody coming in there. So I'll just have like the chillest job ever.
That's a really good answer.
Yeah.
That's a really
I'll go
good
be the
answer.
librarian.
Man, I don't have an answer prepared that's that good. I don't know what I would pick.
What were you going to say?
See, I would pick like the doctor. I would be the town doctor, except you'd be busy all the time because they're all getting injured all the time.
Yeah.
But
you'd probably be real rich though.
Yeah, maybe. But if it's towards the end of the film, maybe it wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah, probably wouldn't be so bad.
Yeah. So maybe that's what I would
just
pick.
Be the town doctor.
Or I feel like being a vet would be really easy because I feel like they have like 3 animals there.
Yeah, true.
So maybe I would do that. Yeah.
There you go.
All right. I have 2 more questions.
Okay.
What would be your premise for a sequel if you were writing a sequel to this movie?
Somebody in town is stealing from the toy making workshop. The toy workshop. It's being stolen from. It's a mystery now.
Oh.
Who in the town is stealing the toys and why? There you go.
You just made a Nancy Drew movie.
I did. It's a mystery now.
You're unbelievable. I would want to see I would want the premise of the sequel to be just a movie that picks up kind of where this movie ends, I guess, but to follow the Sami people.
Oh.
And to like explore their life and experiences. And I don't know what that would be, but that's what I would want to see in a sequel. Like, I think the Sami girl, her name is Margu. That's what she writes on the letter. I would want to follow her. So, like, maybe not necessarily do a movie from her perspective when she's like a little kid, but to do, maybe you could integrate that into it and then just kind of see kind of her side of the story ish, but then, you know, as an adult, kind of like what she's up to. That's what I would like to see in a sequel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, last question. What other holiday origin story would you want to see in this style?
Holiday origin story.
Yeah, so like some of the other like myths surrounding different holidays and things like that. What holiday quote unquote origin story would you pick?
It'd be cool to almost have like a Chinese New Year kind of movie.
Yeah.
That like focused on like the Chinese New Year. I'm not super well versed in like all of the myths behind that, but I think it would be cool to see it in sort of that like stylized, texturized animation. That could be really cool.
Yeah. I'd like to see like St. Patrick's Day. Like like the leprechaun origin. Mm-hmm. Like see and like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. That aspect of St. Patrick's Day, not the religious aspect of St. Patrick's Day, but like the kind of holiday aspect of St. Patrick's Day. That's probably what I would pick.
That sounds cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us on this episode. We look forward to having you back next time. Don't forget you can follow us on our social medias. We have Twitter at Lion and Mouse Pod and Instagram is Lion and Mouse Podcast. Our website, of course, as always, is lionandmousepodcast.com, where you can find our rules of engagements, our notes from each episode. We also have a suggestion box. Please drop a suggestion in there. You can always tell us what you would like to see us review next. And if you so choose, you can support us on Patreon and receive gifts and exclusive content for that additional support. And if you choose to do that, we really, really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. If you like what you heard and you want to help us out, help us extend our reach, you can give us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. And to be perfectly frank with you guys, even if you don't like what you hear and you want to give us a negative review, we're happy for the feedback. We just like engaging with you guys, and we're happy that you're listening and would take the time to do that. So anytime you guys want to give us feedback, you can connect with us on socials or our website, or just reviewing us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever other platform you listen to. Thank you guys so much for listening. We appreciate you so much, and we will have a great hope you have a great holiday season, and we will catch you guys in the next one.